Good morning, everybody. I'd like to start off, as I was thinking about getting prepared for this morning, I'd like to start off by thinking about why I'm here at this conference, why you are here at this conference. I'd like to particularly single out Laura and Mark, who have been so instrumental in calling the conference together. And the reason I think we're here is because there's been a particular tragedy in Pittsburgh, which sort of gave birth to this conference. And then, of course, there are tragedies like that going on all over the world pretty much constantly these days. So why are we all here? We're here, I think, because we feel an obligation to do something about this. And we're willing to give our time and our effort and our money to make an attempt to change the world and to prevent, in this case, hate-fueled violence. I was thinking about that last night as I was thinking about getting ready for introducing Natan Sharansky, who happens to be somebody that I know. I've actually had the privilege of working with Natan on actually more than one project. And he is a truly remarkable man. I'm going to give you a little bit of his bio and then just say a couple of things about him. He was born in Ukraine in 1948. He was a spokesman for the human rights movement, and he was a leader in the struggle for Jews who wanted to leave the Soviet Union. Because of this, he was arrested, put in the Gulag, and spent, I think it's 9 years, in horrible conditions in the Gulag. In fact, Misha just told me that one of the ways he survived while he was there was he played chess in his head. He's a man who was trained as a physicist and a computer scientist, but he has left that and he has devoted himself to improving the human condition, I think is the right way to put it. He was finally released from the Soviet Union, and he made Aliyah, or he went to live in Israel. And in Israel, he became a real hero. He has a quality of leadership that is very hard to define. I was actually talking to Misha about it this morning and trying to figure out what is the essence of Natan's leadership. And I must say, I'm not sure we could define it, but whatever it is, he has it. He's had a very distinguished career as an advocate, an author, a politician. He served in 4 Israeli governments. He has received the highest Israeli award, which is the Israel Prize. And he is also the recipient of the United States Congressional Medal of Honor and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And he is the only non-American citizen who has received those awards. He currently serves as the chair of the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy and the chair of the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement Advisory Board. He's going to be interviewed today by Misha Galperin, another very distinguished citizen who I've also had the pleasure of working with. Misha is a member of the board of the Combat Anti-Semitism Movement, and he has led various Jewish organizations in the world. I think the 2 most prominent, at least in my mind, are in the museum, what used to be called the Museum of the Diaspora in Israel, which was taken over by a woman named Irina Nesvlin. Misha was instrumental in transforming that museum from something which was good into something which is truly great. And I think partly as a result of the success of that museum, he has been asked to lead the what is now the Weizmann National Museum of American Jewish History in Philadelphia, and he's in the process of transforming that. So with that introduction, I just wanted to say that it is, for me, a true personal honor to be asked to introduce these two men, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from Natan and hearing Misha interview him. So thank you very much.
Thank you, David, and thank you for those warm words of introduction and for everything you've done for this community and communities around the world. I've had the privilege of working with David and his late wife Karen on a number of issues, and talking about true leadership, he may be the very definition of what a true leader is. Thank you, Mark and Laura and the organizers of this remarkable conference. I've enjoyed myself very much. This is the first time I'm here, but I'm definitely going to become a regular in about how much you can learn and understand here. It's a very, in fact, global conference. I mean, last night's plenary was a Pakistani American woman living in California and Washington, D.C., interviewing my friend, His Excellency Ahmed Al-Mansouri, who is an Emirati, is from Dubai. And this morning, this Ukrainian-born Jew is going to interview another Ukrainian-born Jew who lives in Israel. And the two of us met for the first time in Ethiopia when we were working to rescue thousands of Ethiopian Jews that were trapped there for centuries. So without further ado, let me turn to the topic at hand before asking Natan to begin talking and asking some questions. When I saw the name of this conference, it really took me back. My education and background originally is in clinical psychology. I was a practicing clinician for many years. And I've also studied a lot of Jewish texts, and that's another passion of mine. In either tradition, the idea that you can eradicate hate is preposterous. In fact, some would say that it's not necessarily such a good thing. In the Jewish tradition, we're taught that there are two motives, two parts in a human being. One that is referred to as Yatzer Tov, which is the good beginning or the good person, and the other is Yatzer Ra, which is a negative part. And the two must coexist and be in a dialectic with each other in order for a human being to survive in the world. If you look into the Christian tradition, stemming from originally the Hebrew Bible, Genesis 8:21 says, the tendency of man's heart is towards evil from his youth. And the notion of the original sin in Christianity, is well known and speaks to the same issue. I turn to my clinical psychology background. The founder of the discipline in many ways, Sigmund Freud, believed that there were instincts and motives in human beings that were for love and hate, and that human beings existed in an ambivalent relationship of these two forces. And in fact, that the hatefulness, the evil, the aggression, the animal nature of humans was often the driver for the greatest achievements that have taken place. In humans, it's moderated by rationality, by what he referred to as ego, and by morality, which he called superego. And my favorite psychologist who invented the whole theory of development of human beings beyond their young age, Erik Erikson, came up with a concept which I think is extraordinary. He said that there is some such thing as pseudo-speciation. That is the tendency of human beings to treat groups of other humans as if they were a different species, right? And that tendency, in fact, is what is necessary often for human beings to define who they are. Having an enemy is as important as having those to identify with. But of course, none of us here would condone the idea that hatred and evil should be allowed to reign. And we need to figure out ways of preventing it and channeling it in the appropriate ways. My friend Natan Sharansky had spent his entire life in the pursuit of fighting for human rights, fighting against expressions of hate and evil. His very first book is called You Shall Fear No Evil. So I want to turn to Natan and ask him, is this a pipe dream? Should we be even talking about eradicating hate?
Thank you, Misha, and welcome, Misha and David and all of you from Jerusalem, just 3 hours before we move all to Sukkah. The Feast of Sukkot starts, which is a good moment to remind us about the real values and the false values. But as to answering your question, it's really interesting how many people dream about the world without anti-Semitism. It's one of the most ancient hatreds. Once, when I was a minister responsible also for the fighting against anti-Semitism, and I was giving my annual reports in the government, and unfortunately speaking about the rise of anti-Semitism on the left, the rise of anti-Semitism on the right, what can be done, what should be done, and what is done in Israel by world jury and so on. And on the third time, one of the ministers, very important ministers, who today is still a minister, came to me and said, Natan, why we have to hear about it again and again? You're such a clever guy. You play chess. Can't you find some trick that we will finish with this? We can finish with unemployment. Why we cannot finish with anti-Semitism? I told him frankly that, look, I know the history. There was not such a society where it didn't exist. It's in the early Christian society, in pagan societies, in Greece, in Egypt, and Rome. And as Jean-Paul Sartre said, that for anti-Semite, Jew is the closest to Satan. So people need Satan. People need somebody to hate. The thing is not how to eradicate hate, but how not to empower hate. How to make hate very different, practically impossible to show it itself, to influence on the other people. And we, Misha, who both are from the former Soviet Union, we can easily remember how hate was a very important weapon for totalitarian regime. They needed that people who are deprived by of any religion will hate religion, will hate people who are believers. They needed that people whom they deprived of any identity will hate identity. And of course, for dictators who look how to unite people in the struggle against external or internal enemy, even invented enemy, Jews were the ideal for this hatred, both externally and internally. So the problem is not only that there existed anti-Semitism, but it was empowered. It was an important part of the rule of controlling the people. And speaking about the hatred, it was very clear in the Soviet Union that there are two types of hatred. There are people who hate to live as slaves. Practically everybody hated to live in slavery. And as a result, they wanted to express themselves, but they were afraid. So they had to force themselves not to speak freely their minds. They felt themselves slaves, and they hated those, they really hated those who are free, who are not afraid. And this hate was used by the authorities. So you can find out that people who have strong identity, who have beliefs, who are not afraid to be free, for them, it's not dangerous. They are not full of hatred towards the others. They can be sorry that they are not enough high on the standards which they put for themselves. They can even hate themselves. But they don't have hate to destroy the other's identity, to destroy the religiosity, because they are themselves very strong in their own roots. So in prison I learned that your best allies are people who, like you, believe in freedom, but who have their strong identity. So Ukrainian nationalists and Russian Orthodox and Lithuanian Orthodox Catholic priests were my closest friends, because we knew that we can rely on one another. Nobody is here in form of KGB, because he or she is very strong in their own identity, and that's why they don't hate the other. They respect the other. They need the other. So that's my philosophy that I learned in the Soviet prison.
And it's fascinating in many ways, Natan. You and I have talked about it quite a bit. That it's in contrast to what we often hear in the world, which is actually just the opposite. That it is religion, that it is belief in a particular set of rules, in particular kind or expression of God that drives hatred among people. In fact, we know from psychological research that it's a lot easier to hate groups of people than individual. The ideal that's been held up for many years, I sort of quote you, you've told me more than once, I think, that there is this wonderful, popular, extraordinary song by John Lennon, Imagine, right, where the words are, imagine the world which has no borders, which has no religion, which has nothing to die for. And your view of this is, if there is nothing to die for?
My view is that if there is nothing to die for, there is nothing to live for. And that's something that people try to ignore. There are two basic desires, which everybody has. One is to be free, primitive, simply speaking, that nobody will tell me what to think. But the other is to belong to something much bigger than yourself. And it often seems like contradiction, that if you want to belong something bigger than yourself, to some group, then you are supposed to hate the other group. And if there is, let's say, Israel today is a part of the free world, where many feel that religion and identity are enemies of our freedom, and it's better to give up on our identity in order to protect our freedom. And on the other hand, be part of the Middle East, where mainly it is felt that freedom is enemy of our identity, so we'll give up on democracy, on freedom, in order to keep our identity. And both things are bad. Or you go to the fundamentalism, and you hate the others for not being like you. Or you go to decadence, when there are really no values, like in this Imagine. And when there is nothing you are ready to fight for, that there is no way that you can protect your freedom. But the moment you have both, you're a very happy person. And in prison, it meant it's somebody that you can work with him, you can cooperate with him, you can rely on his otherness, because he will not hate the people only because they look different, and as a result, he will not be in former KGB. In prison, everything was coming to this. Can you rely on this person or not? And I believe that people with strong feeling of independence, of freedom, and with a strong feeling of identity, of roots, of self-confidence, are those people that you can rely on.
I think that's a view that is important and extraordinary and not heard enough, so I'm very happy to hear you talk about this, Natan. But we also live in an age, it seems, where the differences among people, where the polarization is become a true epidemic, and the active expressions of hate, such as the extraordinary growth in anti-Semitism around the world, including this country over the last number of years, seems to parallel this phenomenon of polarization of people of different convictions and faiths and political views moving further and further away from the center into the extremes. What do you think both causes it, and is there any way for people like the people in this room and on live stream who are dedicated to fighting the expressions of hatred amongst people can do to try to narrow the gap, to have the understanding among people of different groups and religions and nationalities and political views that would lead to frankly a better world? Because in Israel today, in the United States, and certainly in lots of countries that are not democratic, you see more and more of that pronounced.
Well, that's a big problem, not for two of us to solve, but it's something that all the world has to deal with this. The hatred is there, it's old. Even when we see new antisemitism in the new forms, demonization of Jewish people, demonization of Jewish state, but the demonization itself is as old as the world. What added to polarization today, of course, it's among the other factors of the social media, when everybody can choose his own or her own page on Facebook and not to talk to the others, to talk only on their Facebook. By the way, yesterday I was in some conversation with the group of Jews with Elon Musk. And that was a very typical example how, on one hand, we are all for the freedom of speech. On the other hand, when everybody is only on his or her Facebook and don't talk to one another, then the hate grows exponentially. And I believe because the polarization starts always in politics, definitely in America we can see polarization when people who vote for Trump or for Obama don't talk to one another. And in Israel, of course, with the demonstration, which all go under Israeli flag, and sometimes in one family, one son comes on one demonstration and then comes back home, gives Israeli flag to the other, and he goes on the other demonstration. And though it is like one family, but demonstrations don't talk to one another. And this, well, there is a whole bunch of problems because of this. But specifically for hate, or let's say for anti-Semitism, the problem is not to permit it become political, that you're fighting only against anti-Semitism in the opposite camp. You're saying it's they on the right that they are anti-Semites. And the people on the right will say, no, it's only those who are on the left, look in the campuses and so on. Everybody has, first of all, to fight with hate in his or her own political camp. Otherwise, it seems simply turns all in political fight, and then there is no way to win this universal hatred if we are turning it into political fight.
Natan, you've also spent a lot of time, I know, talking with and supporting dissident movements and dissidents in other countries. And you've talked about how dissidents have this irreplaceable role in how the country is shaped, how the mood is shaped, that their fight is necessary. Do you think that there is a place for sort of a dissident movement in this arena of universality that seems to be the only solution people come out with, that we should treat each other well because we're all the same and that there are no differences among us?
Well, when once I organized together with the Václav Havel meeting of democratic dissidents, it was in 2007 in Prague, and they came democratic dissidents from China, from Russia, then it was Garry Kasparov and Lyudmila Alexeyeva, from Iraq, from Iran, from Lebanon, from Egypt, from 25 whatever different countries. Muslims, Jews, Christians, Chinese, I don't know what religion was these Chinese dissidents. They were all against totalitarianism. You can say, oh, they're all the same, they're against totalitarianism. But they all lived in their own identity. They got the strength to speak freely their mind because they felt that the history of their people is on their side, and of course the culture of their people is on their side. And that is real solidarity of people who are different and who love to enjoy freedom, and they love that the others also enjoy freedom like them, or are ready to fight for freedom, living in their own identity. And today, if you ask me the role of the free will, first of all, to support those dissidents who speak against their dictators, whether they are in Iran or today, by the way, back in Russia, or of course in China or in any other part of the world, and giving them bigger voice, and as a result, making the life of their dictators, their oppressors, more miserable. We at the same time are helping to us to go back to the real values which unite us and appreciate really the power on which our civilization is built. That we are all free people on the left and the right, and we have to know how to use our freedom in the best possible way in order to increase the volume of freedom and not to decrease it.
Thank you. We're almost out of time, but before we end, I can't not ask you a question about yours and mine place of birth. You were born in Donetsk in Ukraine. I was born and raised in Odessa. And of course, what's going on in Ukraine today, a Russian attack and occupation and the atrocities and the war crimes that we're hearing about have been, in the limelight in the world when it started. But I can see how now, almost 19, 20 months later, this is beginning to fade and is now more in the back pages, and there is no unity and the issue of humanity and human rights and what's being done to the population in Ukraine is not being attended to. What are your thoughts? I know you've recently been to Ukraine and you talked to President Zelensky. What are your thoughts about what else we can do to help support the fight and help with the fate of the Ukrainians who are victims of war?
First of all, of course, it's awful tragedy, but it's very important to remember. That's what I tried to say from the very first moment of this war. It's not the war about the piece of territory in Ukraine, whether it is my Donetsk or your Odessa or our Ukraine. It's not about the piece of that or that another land. It's attempt to change all the rules by which the free world is run, to go back, in fact, to rebuild Russian Empire, but it means to go back to change all the relations between the countries in the free world, back to the of the time of the imperialism of the beginning of 20th or even 19th century. And as this is a big threat. We are very lucky that Putin, who was absolutely sure that he now can rebuild empire, made a big mistake about power of his own army. It was so corrupt, and he didn't know that it's so corrupt. He did a big mistake about undermining the desire of other people to live in accordance with their identity. He said that Ukrainians are not a nation, and it is not a state, and so on. And today they are more nation, more state than for 1,000 years of their history. And he made a big mistake thinking that he can blackmail the world by nuclear threat, and they will not dare to do anything. So Ukraine goes through terrible suffering. Jewish communities, and all Ukraine, but they do it with a lot of vigor, with a lot of courage, and they are ready to continue fighting, defending their freedom. I met recently President Zelensky. He organized a kosher lunch. I was very grateful to him, but it's not our first meeting during the war. And of course, he's a great leader, but he says again and again that in the end, it all depends whether the free world will continue supporting them. And I have to say, if the free world was making all the decisions 3 months before, whether giving initial ammunition, whether giving tanks, whether giving airplanes, everything could look very different. And now the biggest threat and the biggest hope of Putin is that the free world will be tied. And as President Zelensky said, that they think that already soon after winter, our problem, not our problems with Russians, but our problems in continuing getting support from the West, we will start feeling it. And so we are really feeling that we are running against the time. So if it is only Ukrainian war, and we have some sympathy, and of course we have a lot of sympathy, and we are helping them, it's one thing. If it is war for the future of the free world, it's another thing. And yes, I think we have to hear by the voices of Russian dissidents who write me from prison how my book written about KGB, of those years help them. It means that the circle it goes full circle, it goes back to Brezhnev and even Stalin's Russia. And we have to hear the voices of fighting Ukraine and the voice of those who are fighting for their freedom and for our freedom.
Thank you. And of course, I think of Ukraine as a shining example at this point of the possibility of change. You know, a country which has a long history of anti-Semitism has elected with something like a 78% a Jewish president who is very open about that.
I have to add one word. Misha, I have to add one word.
Please.
Misha.
Please.
Today is anniversary of Babi Yar. And of course, President Zelensky goes and puts the rest, and Jews have the march at the same 2 miles, which then 34,000 Jews did in 2 days, and everybody was stripped and killed. And Babi Yar is the biggest symbol of the Holocaust by bullets, and it is also the biggest symbol of the efforts to raise the memory about Holocaust in the country where we grew. Ukraine, from the very first day of this independence, opened all their archives. I am the head of the board of Memorial Center Babi Yar, can say that such level of cooperation, which we are getting from Ukraine in bringing all the archives about Jewish history, about the history of Holocaust, is unprecedented. Those who think it's normal try to get any archives from Moscow about persecution of Jews by Stalin in 1950, whatever. So Ukraine, not only with this government, also with the previous, makes a big effort to face some very tragic pages of our mutual past, of persecutions, pogroms from Bogdan Khmelnytsky to the 20th century. And it's also very important part of their forming their own identity. is to face their own past and learning from it how to make sure that we are building different type of the country. And the very fact, of course, is you're right, that in absolutely free elections and in very tough competition, this big majority voted for openly Jewish and sympathetic to Israel and to Jewish people. President also says something.
Well, thank you, Natan. Hag Sameach, happy upcoming holiday. You couldn't be with us in person because in just a couple of hours, the holiday starts in Jerusalem. I really much appreciate you being with us and for your wisdom and for your courage. Thank you.
Thank you, Misha. Thank you, everybody.